And welcome to another Bancroft Brothers animation podcast. My 4 favorite words. How you doing, Tony?
Those are my 4 favorite words too, Tom. Although I do like elongate, elastic,
Oh,
I like frivolous, and I
a
like energy.
couple of those were adult words.
No, only in your mind.
Anyway, that's fantastic, Tony. Tony, we're coming to everybody today, and
Yeah.
you are in California, and I am in our home of Nashville. Not our home. We
Yes,
don't live together.
No, we don't. It's been a crazy summer so far, right, Tom? I mean, we just got right into it. The school let out, and when I say school, we teach at Lipscomb University in Tennessee here, and graduation happened, and boom, not even a full week later, I'm on a plane to China. I've been doing some stuff with Sense Labs. They had me come on as an ambassador for the new Pin Display 16, which I love, and I was honored to do it. And we shot a commercial. Did you see my commercial?
I saw a part of your commercial, and it's really good, man. It's a slick commercial.
Oh, they put like
By the way,
dollars
Tony,
into
it wasn't because I got bored and couldn't watch the whole thing. It's just they haven't premiered the full commercial apparently.
Yeah, that's coming out this week. I'm also doing a Kickstarter right now. So if anybody listens to this soon, I really hope you guys will support it. It's with one of my grad students from Lipscomb. She's doing a short called The Piano. So if you go on a Kickstarter, look for The Piano 2D animated short. I'm super proud of what Avery Kroll, who's the director and producer of the film, she is doing on it. Kroll! I'm an executive producer on it, and I'm happy to do that. I've been helping her all along the way, and we're at a point where we're getting into production, and so we need to raise some funds just to pay for some of the other students, really kind of buy their time during the summer and things like that when they don't really want to work on it. You got to pay people professional as best you can. We're not going to pay professional wages, but we want to give them a little something, and that's really all we're doing with the Kickstarter. Is we just need a little nudge of some funds to really get this thing going, kickstarted, but also it's going to look great. 2D animation all the way.
All right, so we're going to move into this. So I want to give a little preamble before we get into this. We just decided what we were going to talk about tonight. So this is fresh. No research has been done. And it's all from sort of personal experiences with this person and friends of his. And so therefore we may get a few things wrong. But hopefully the spirit and 99% of what we say is going to be truth and fact and all that.
It's like fan talk. This is like groupie time.
But this spawns off of another podcast, actually. Tony, you and I both did a podcast with a guy in Ireland. What's his name? It's Colin.
There's that non-research coming in.
Yeah. There it is. And he has I listen to his podcast now pretty religiously. It's called Animator's Breakfast. The
Animator's Breakfast. That's right.
Animator's Breakfast. And so go listen to that podcast. It's really good. He had Tony on separate from me, and then I did one. And he likes to have the animator or whoever it is, character designer. It's just somebody in the industry. And he says to them, please pick a topic, meaning either a film or even an artist or something like that. And Tony, you talked about Freddie Moore, right?
I did, yes.
And guess what? I talked about Glen Keane.
Glen Keane.
That's the Latin for Glen Keane.
Glen Keane.
And because he is royalty, Tony. And I actually kind of went on there and gave it a title and stuff. I'm reusing all that information because I did a little research for that. I didn't get to tell all the stories. And Tony, I know you have stories where you worked with them a little bit. Different times. We both worked with them closely. And
where I was touched by the miracle that is Glen. Yes.
Oh my gosh, that sounded bad. So this we're going to call The Rise of Glen Keane. I kind of gave that title to call
it kind of a Star Wars thing, right? Like
but
here's why. The Empire.
Here's why. A lot of our listeners know Glen Keane. I mean, let's say all of them do, really, because he's one of the best
He's the
living
biggest
animator.
rock star of all time when it comes to animation.
He is, and he should be. And everything you hear that's good, it's true. But I do want to say this, which is a lot of our listeners know him from the Little Mermaid on. They really don't know much of what was before that. And we'll say that was the first fifth of his career and those early days. And we know a little piece of that. I won't say that we know the very, very beginning. I do know, I do want to recite his to start, and you could do it if you want. His story he told on our podcast of how he got into CalArts, and then we can go from there about his early days at Disney.
Well, first I want to start with a very early trivia that some people may not know. There's a comic strip artist named Bill Keane. So his father, Bill Keane, was the creator of the Family Circus, which is that newspaper. If you've ever seen early newspapers, which date back to the dinosaurs, and it was a circle panel gag. That was the Family Circus. It used to be called the Family Circle and then Family Circus.
Well, you
And
know why?
he is
Family Circle magazine, I think, threatened to sue because there was a Family Circle magazine.
Right. So it turned into the Family Circus. That's how most people know it. And Bill Keane used to draw basically his family. So Glen is one of the characters, little Billy. I think Billy is Glen Keane.
Billy's Glen.
Mm-hmm. And there's some other characters in there, and
there's a Jeffy, who's the other brother,
and Jeff Keane is Glen's brother in real life. Yeah,
and we've met Jeff, and now he's taken over the comic strip for his dad when he retired, and then unfortunately he has passed. Bill Keane has, but strip is still going.
Yeah, so it's a family of artists. So Glen came out of a family of artists, of course, inspired by his dad, who he would go visit in the studio all the time and even get little art lessons from what we've heard. Glen was very into football. I've heard that too in high school and college. In fact, that's how he and Ron Husband met. Ron Husband is another Disney legend that worked at Disney, and they had that in common, that they both loved football. So they shared an office early days at Disney. I don't know if you knew that, Tom.
Fast friends. No, I did know that. And also they shared the same faith or introduced one another to the faith of Christianity.
Ron introduced Glen to Christianity.
Yeah, which became a huge part of his life, of course. And so I'll start into the story, which is just worth mentioning since we're talking about his early days, which is how he got into CalArts. So I think the way it worked was that, his dad had kind of trained him a little bit. He would go to his dad and he'd say, "Dad, I'm trying to do this drawing. Can you help me?" And sort of like what he would do then later on, years later, when he was at Disney, his dad would put a piece of paper over it and do drawing corrections and show him those tips and tricks you were talking about, Tony.
Like a mentor does.
Like a mentor. And unlike my girls, who for 1 week wanted to learn how to draw, didn't want to listen to me, Glen ate it up and really, really wanted to learn and all that. And so, but he wanted to be a painter. He's always been very fine artist.
Classically trained. Yeah.
Very classically trained. And that is still to this day, if you talk to Glen for any short amount of time, if you talk about the masters, you talk about, French Impressionism or whatever, he's all over it. That's what he wants to talk about, and sculpture too. So anyway, he's that kind of guy, unlike us, Tony, completely unlike us.
Yeah,
very much fine artist. And so he wanted to go to CalArts.
See, Tom, you know about Leonardo DiCaprio. Glen has studied Leonardo da Vinci.
Yes, I know.
That's the difference.
I know DiCaprio a lot better. Yeah, not I don't have his email, but anyway, so with his dad and the help, and this is before the internet and stuff, they kind of searched out what were some really good art schools, and they happened to hear about CalArts. I don't know why they thought that was a great fine arts school. Maybe at the time it was, but I have different feelings about it now.
It was brand new. But they probably heard about it from Disney, because Disney was a part of it in the early days.
You're jumping ahead. He did not want to be a Disney animator at this point, Tony. He wanted to be a fine artist. That's part of the story. He was going, and so him and his dad, he packed his portfolio together of paintings and drawings and stuff, and they went and drove out to California, because this is back when you kind of had to do that, and took his portfolio, and they it was like during the summer, so like there was nobody there really except for like a secretary that would kind of work during the summer. And so they were like, who can we show this portfolio to? I really want to get into the fine arts program. And the secretary said, well, there's nobody here, I'm sorry. And besides, it's we'll have to look at it later, can you just leave it? And I think it was just an overnight thing. I'm adding a little bit to the story. And
Sure,
sure enough, they came back like the next day, and somebody had reviewed it, and they said, congratulations, you're accepted. And so boom, he's excited. A few months go by, it's time to go to CalArts. And I'm really winging this story quite a bit, but the basics are here, and they are true, I know that. And he goes back to CalArts, and he finds out just before he's about to start that they didn't put him in fine arts. They put him in this thing called character animation. Or no, I think it was, or was it experimental?
It was probably experimental animation.
I think it was experimental, because they didn't have the character animation department yet. When we went, Tony, you know this, there was character animation and experimental animation, two different tracks, and really two different floors. And really, we didn't even know those people. All different teachers. Anyway, he got into experimental animation, and he's like, what is this? He didn't even know what it was. And they said, well, sorry, but fine art is full. If you want to come to CalArts, you have to be in experimental animation. And sure enough, he said, okay, because he just thought, well, I'll learn, maybe I'll be able to take a class, or I'll meet a painter, and I'll learn a little bit through osmosis, or but he ended up falling in love with animation after he learned what it was. But he literally had no idea the thing.
Just by accident, he fell into animation. That's awesome.
He did.
And the other thing I'm getting from that, he wasn't top choice. Glen Keane wasn't top choice for the fine arts program.
Well, that part of the story might have been that he was late and it was already full. I don't know, but listen to our podcast. He does tell this story. I'm just reciting it. But I want to put everybody, why I tell that story secondhand, and we're going to do a lot of that anyway, is just to kind of set people's sort of minds at ease to some degree that, yes, he is godlike, but he is just a man. And things just happen to him sometimes. And in your career, you listener, it will happen to you too, where you've made the best plans and you think you know what is perfect for you out there, and something else happens, and at first it could seem like the worst thing possible.
Right? Like you could come out of the womb and you think, I got this, and then you discover you're a twin. And you're like, I
know. Imagine my disappointment. Thank you for telling that story. Yeah. Secondhand. So let's fast forward a little bit. So he gets out of CalArts, obviously, and I don't know what kind of a student. That would be interesting. I don't think we ever asked him that question. We had him on the podcast twice now.
No, but he did. I think people will be interested to know that he was part of a pretty famous early class. It was the very first class for character animation. And people like John Musker, a famous Disney director, was in it. Brad Bird. Who else?
Haskett? Was Danny Haskett?
Well, he was part of he was in the class, but he was part of the Disney group
at Disney.
Rat's Nest.
So early influence on
Jerry Reese, I think, was in it. But yeah, there was a whole group of these guys that were very.
Did you say Lasseter? You said Lasseter too, right?
Oh, John Lasseter too. Yeah.
There's and Henry Selick.
No, I don't think Henry Selick's correct. I think he went to a different university.
Okay.
He was Rat's Nest, though. You're right. You're right about. Later on, he met at Disney.
Right. I'm kind of getting.
They were all at Disney, and then also he was part of when he did start at Disney. Glenn was part of this Rat's Nest group, which was like all these young renegades all put together. He was not in that group per se. I think he was not quite as rebellious as those guys were. So he kind of stayed above all that a little bit. But he was caught up in a young generation of go-getters that were Tim Burton and Henry Selick and John Musker and Brad Bird, all these guys that were there at the same time in the early 70s, mid 70s of Disney feature animation. And Glen was right in there with them. And they really represented the next generation of Disney animators. They were being taught by Eric Larson, one of the 9 Old Men, who was like, everybody says was like the sweetest grandfatherly type guy, and really loved and spent time with all these new recruits at Disney feature animation, including Glen. So Glen was very influenced by Eric and some of the 9 Old Men. In fact, he was put into Ollie Johnson's unit as a trainee and was taught directly by Ollie Johnson of Frank and Ollie Johnson.
Johnston.
Fame.
I can't believe you got that wrong. It's so embarrassing for you.
Johnston.
That's what you said?
That's what I said. Anyway, okay. Go back and listen again. Anyway, so Glen was taught by one of the 9 Old Men, which is actually 2 of them, if you count Eric Larson, which is really cool. He was around when, Milt Kahl was still there and all these guys. And it was really, that was the handoff. That was the handoff of all the legacy and the tradition, the knowledge, and was poured into Glen. In fact, there's a great story, Tom. Do you want to tell the story about not Rescuers Down Under, sorry.
The original Rescuers?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm looking at his IMDb. So before I jump into that story, I want to talk about those early years. Tony, did you know, and this could be wrong, I'm on his IMDb, so I am researching, but as we all know, IMDb can be very wrong. It says here that before he came to Disney, he worked at, I'm guessing it's Hanna-Barbera. I don't know which studio this is. There's a TV series called My Favorite Martians, Lassie's Rescue Rangers, Mission Magic, and then guess what? Star Trek, the animated series. It calls him a layout artist, which, as we know in early TV animation production, meant you were probably drawing the background and the characters, and it would then get shipped off overseas. It was sort of like doing keys.
It was like characters. Posing out, yeah.
It's like, more like posing, but you'd also do a sketch of the background, most likely. You had to do both, honestly. It was kind of interesting back then. So that a lot of people don't know that they think he came right out of CalArts and went right to Disney. And apparently, if this is true, from in about 1972 and 73, I'm guessing mostly 1973, he had a little jaunt at either Hanna-Barbera or Ruby Spears, is my guess.
That could have been probably like even a summer job, or a lot of these guys would get little jobs in the industry while they're still going to CalArts. So I'm guessing that probably was while he was still
this says
learning and growing.
This says he worked on Star Trek the Animated Series alone, 22 episodes. I kind of doubt that's true.
That sounds not accurate.
But he also did 16 episodes of Mission Magic and like 16 episodes of Lassie's Rescue Rangers. Like that's really a few years. That's a few years of work.
I don't think that would have shown up in a lot of his interviews and talks if it was that much time. I bet it was a summer, and I bet he touched just a couple things. But he probably did have some of this work here and there. A lot of animators start that way, is by doing little bit jobs here and there.
Yeah,
for TV animation, especially that time period.
That feels right. So, but in 1977, I just want to talk about some of his early films. He goes back to the Rescuers, the original Rescuers, in 1977. Did work on Pete's Dragon. Guess what? A Family Circus Christmas in 1979. He took a break, it looks like, from Disney. And he worked on The Spirit, the original Spirit short with Brad Bird, I'm guessing, in 1980. But anyway, A Family Circus Christmas, I did hear that he kind of pulled away from Disney, whether he had permission or what, and actually worked to do some animation of his dad's comic strip. That's very cool.
Probably got some Billy scenes, just animated himself.
He did. Okay, and here's some of the ones that we're about to talk about. Then he was on to Pete's Dragon, Fox and the Hound, Family Circus Easter. I didn't miss that one. And then so there's a Christmas and an Easter one. Mickey's Christmas Carol, this is where we start coming into the picture is Mickey's Christmas Carol. We'll talk about that in a minute. Then the Black Cauldron, Great Mouse Detective, the Chipmunk Adventure. He left Disney to do that. Then back at Disney, Oliver and Company, and up to the Little Mermaid. But we're going to stop there. I'd prefer, Tony, if we didn't even talk about anything past Oliver and Company today.
I feel like everybody knows all about Little Mermaid on.
Yeah.
That's really where he became a star. But some of his first early standout things, I would say, I think Rescuers, what the original Rescuers was his first film, from what I've always heard, at Disney, his first feature, working with Ollie Johnson. And I remember a story where Ollie gave him a scene, and it was just kind of a small scene. You know, it was literally Bernard is outside of, if I remember the story right, Bernard, the movie, Bernard is sweeping outside of a big meeting that's going on.
He's the janitor at the Rescue Aid Society. So he's not even one of the agents like Bianca is. She's like sort of the high-end agent, and she's volunteered to take on this very scary
but
thing.
Bernard wants to be an agent. He wants to be part of the action. Right. And so he's the janitor and he's sweeping, and this is Glen's scene. He was sweeping and just kind of listening at the door to the meeting that's going on with the Rescue Aid Society. And he didn't get it. It took him like, what was it, 3 or 4 times? That's what I've heard.
I've heard more than that. I think it was 5 or 7 times.
5 to 7 times.
Yeah.
Because he did all this research and he started it with the approach of like, you know, how does a sweep go? Oh, you got to lean into it, and the weight distribution. And he started thinking about it more as a mechanical exercise, and he lost the character. And so,
well, and let's be honest,
Ollie,
anybody would do that, right? You'd think, it's a guy sweeping. That's the way they handed the scene to him. Okay, Bernard is sweeping. Do that. And like maybe at the very end of it, he turns his head because he hears something, and that's probably the shot. And we should look at it sometime. But in general, it was just Bernard sweeping. So any animator would then go, okay, I'm gonna, beginning animator especially, I'm gonna dive in and just like learn the mechanics of how do you sweep, and I'm gonna act it out and videotape myself and things like that. And sure enough, that's what I'm taking over your story. When he showed Ollie, that's what he kept seeing. He's like, no. What is Bernard thinking? How is he feeling about sweeping? Is he a happy sweeper? Does he love his job? Does he hate his job? And that's the story. If you've heard this story from Glen, here's the other side of the story though, Tony. I've seen these drawings. So I got the opportunity to flip Glen Keane's first animated scene. And here's why. I was in Florida. I was probably his age or younger than when he actually did that scene. I was 21 or 22. And I discovered that my mentor, Mark Henn, one of the top 10 animators at Disney, especially then top 5. And anyway, he had this archive of scenes that he just had stacked up that weren't his. He used to, when he was first starting at Disney, because he came in just after Glen. Glen was already doing sort of some of his, his first work, really, because that's what he said. Glen threw away that scene, and it wasn't uncommon. Like, all the animators would just have this big bin that they would throw their roughs into, because then it would get cleaned up and all that. And so those drawings weren't needed anymore, and they would just throw them away. This was before they knew value of that and all that. And so they would throw them away, just like they threw away cells because they were flammable and things like that. So they didn't archive a lot of that stuff back then. They'd throw it away. And so sure enough, Mark Henn, being like an intern or whatever, like a newbie, he was scouring that at night, and he saw that whole scene and he took it. And so I don't know if Glen knows this to this day, but Mark has his first flippable animated scene. It's that Bernard sweeping scene. And I flipped it, and I was like, what hit me, Tony?
Yeah.
It's going to sound bad. It wasn't great. You know what I mean? Like, you didn't see any of the Glen Keane greatness that we all know about now. The lines were thin, like he did it with a number 2 pencil. He hadn't learned.
He was probably emulating his mentor, Ollie Johnson, because Ollie had a very light touch. He always used a sharper pencil. Glen later got known for, really thick, bold layout pencils and rough lines. And scribble, scribble,
A
but
10B
yeah,
Mitsubishi. Yeah.
right. But that's what he came to. But yeah, I'm sure in the beginning he was tight, trying to emulate what Ollie was doing.
But I love seeing that. And I can't remember if I think I uncovered it. I don't think Mark was using it as an example, like, oh, here's, you're a newbie. Look, here's a story about, how Glenn started. It wasn't like that. I think I just found it, but he did tell me that story of how Ollie had made him do it over and over again. I don't know if this was the final version. It probably was one of the
One of the
tries.
early ones.
Yeah. That
The
got thrown
trials.
away is my guess. But it looked kind of like Ollie had done it, but they were like this big. They were like an inch tall, the drawings. Like he was tiny. It wasn't, that's why Ollie gave it up. It was not a glamorous shot.
But I mean, it's a tribute to Glenn. He didn't give up. He learned from Ollie. He put character into it. That's the one that's in the film, is the one that Ollie approved, that had more character and personality into it. And that probably is what awoke a lot in Glenn. Working with Ollie, really thinking about character and personality changed his scope, because as we all know, Glenn is known for not only awesome drawings and that are very energetic and cool, but he's known to be the animator's animator, kind of the actor, the true actor with a pencil. And performance was always high. When we knew him in the 90s, everything he talked about was about getting to know your character and drawing out the performance of the character in your drawings and all that kind of stuff. So that's what he became. And it started there with Ollie on Rescuers. So fast forward a little bit here, Tom. Really, one of his big breakthroughs that I remember is Christmas Carol.
Yes.
I think it's really
Tony,
worth talking to that.
When somebody, and I'm going to ask you the same question, but when somebody asks me, or I ask myself, when was the first time that I heard of Glen Keane? I'm going to say it was when we were at CalArts, and they had like their own little archive at CalArts. You remember that? Where animators and people like that had come and spoken through the years, they would come and bring scenes and they would Xerox them. Or CalArts would say, "Can we Xerox that?"
I remember the students would take it like, "Oh, can I get a copy of this?" Like they would bring it in just to demo, flip a scene or something like that. Whoever the animator guest speaker was, and the students would like beg for it, and then pay all this money because the copier was not free. Pay all this money just to get a copy of the whole scene, and they would usually let them, especially Glenn.
Yes, and so I remember seeing drawings and probably animation, flippable animation from that movie, Mickey's Christmas Carol, and he animated the character of the giant, and it's the giant from Mickey's Beanstalk, that short, and they were bringing him back for Mickey's Christmas Carol. He played the ghost of Christmas Present. And so he was one of those three ghosts. He was Ghost of Christmas Present. I just watched that sequence recently, but I'll tell you, you and I both, and I know I'm speaking for you a little bit here, but I'll just say I saw that sequence that he did, and to me, it was everything I ever wanted to do in cartooning, in character design, in animation. It had everything to it, and I had never seen anything so good. And really, it's still a high level to me. I miss Glen Keane doing that kind of cartoony work, because he was so good. But like McCall, he got the more serious stuff later on in his career, the Ariels, the Beasts, the Aladdins, even, which had
I remember that, Tom. So here's a little personal.
Go ahead.
Here's a little personal story that's connected to that. I don't know if you remember this, but and I'm probably going to delete some of the details in my shallow memory here, but I remember that you loved that short so much, and I did too. But I do remember you going on about it, and we were working at the Disney MGM Studios in Orlando, Florida at the time. And we had a gallery, if you remember.
Oh my gosh!
You would go into the gallery, and there would be sales from new productions and even some older productions.
You're naming off one of my larger regrets in life, but go ahead.
Yes. Good. You can fill in the blanks in my story here. I remember they had a sale of the giant from Mickey's Christmas Carol for sale. And I remember you love that, and I think I bought that for you.
You did not. No.
I think I bought it for you for Christmas. That's what I remember.
Well, where is it? I
I don't
mean,
know. Or maybe I looked into, well, see, that's my shallow
I
memory.
think you thought about
Maybe
it.
I looked into it and I thought about it and
Yeah.
but it was pricey. It was a big sale. It was like, really 24 filled and
Oh, and they would
a
put
lot
like
of,
a color, like a laser print background from the actual background,
yeah.
behind it. So it looked like a
It was
frame
it was like a
from the movie.
key too. And you could tell it was Glen Keane
And I think it was
drawing and
with probably Donald Duck, because he did a lot of
yes.
Donald and the Giant together, where he's pulling grapes off of his feet and things like
Yeah.
that.
The more I think about it, the more I think I wanted to buy that for you, but it was too expensive. So I bought another one that was maybe just Mickey or something, a smaller one.
I still don't know what happened to that, but
You
I mean,
sold it, I'm
I've
sure.
sold a lot of artwork through the years for sure,
Yeah,
but
you
if it
have.
was that one, I would remember it. So thank you for thinking about it, Tony. That was really nice of you. But I
Yeah.
do remember. I remember you telling that story and maybe being a little heartbroken that I had this Mickey instead. No, no, but
Yeah.
no, but okay. So, but back to that, we would go up to that gallery because they would get new cells in every so often, and because we worked at the park there, and by the way, this place is not there anymore. It's long gone. It was amazing at the time because
Mm,
this was kind of right at the beginning to the middle of that real cell collecting animation boom of the, we'll say, 90s, maybe early 2000s. They got killed when Disney did Cells. That's a whole nother podcast, but they killed it by putting out fakes. Basically, you couldn't tell with the production cell or
right.
drawing and what wasn't, and so it just killed the whole industry. But anyway, we knew these were production pieces. We could tell which ones were Glen Keane scenes, and we would go up there. They had a lot from Mickey's Christmas Carol of the
They
Giant
did.
and Donald.
Mhm.
I remember so many of them. And then when Little Mermaid came out, when we first started there in 1989, it came out that summer. So within a year, they had Little Mermaid cells, and then there were Glen
Right.
Keane Part of Your World animated cells, like from
Yeah.
Part of Your World, that are
And they
priceless.
weren't selling these things like anywhere else. This was
No,
before Disney stores exist. There was no Disney stores. They would only sell things in parks. And
yeah,
we had one of the all-time best galleries in any of the parks that existed back then, Anaheim or, right there
it was
at Disney and
basically the gift
USPS.
shop. You know how you go through the gift shop now after every ride, anywhere in Disney World, and they're all just stupid stuff, right? This was
Yeah.
actually you'd empty out into this gift shop and everything was like amazing. They had animation books, they had pencils, animator pencils. Buy an animator pencil. It was just a blue color erase,
Yeah, I
pencil.
think they even had blank paper you could
They
buy.
had animation paper that was pegged, and
Yeah.
yeah, like stuff that at the time anyway, kids didn't know how to get that, and they were like, "Hey, I could become an animator just by buying this." And who
Yeah.
knows how many people did that. Um, it was amazing, and the sales were amazing, and we got Disney discounts. But if at Christmas time, this is when you were trying to do that, Tony. It was a Christmas gift because
Yeah.
at Christmas time we got like 50% off of things for like one day only or something like that. So it encouraged
Yeah.
people to buy, and they didn't exclude the maquettes or the cells. And so
Yeah.
animators would go down there at Christmas time and just buy cells and maquettes like crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Aaron Blaze and a bunch of people did that over the years.
Yeah. Anyway, fun tangent there. And man,
Yeah.
some missed opportunity. I wish I had some of those. I wish I would have gotten some of those
I
part of your
know.
world, Glen Keane.
We should have bought so much of that stuff.
But honestly, I didn't care about the cells that much. I wanted rough animation drawings, and I still do. That's what I
Yeah.
collect
Yeah.
primarily.
And they never released those. They
They didn't
wouldn't
have
sell
those.
rough drawing. They didn't
Yeah.
think they had any value. So
No,
yeah, they were trashing that stuff.
I know. And that was actually what you and I would have collected more than cells.
Yeah, for sure.
So anyway, let's move on. So first time I heard about Glen Keane, it was in association with Mickey's Christmas Carol and his work on the Giant. How about you, Tony? Is it the
Yeah, I
same?
think that was probably definitely that. But I'll tell you, his work on Gray Mouse Detective was highly influential on me. Just like you're saying about Mickey's Christmas Carol, It wasn't until I saw the work he was doing on Radigan, and by that time, you and I were at CalArts,
Yeah.
and that's when they were working on Great Mouse Detective, and Glenn would actually, as did other animators, would come to CalArts sometimes, and as a favor to Joe Ramft, who was one of our teachers for story, or any of the other teachers, he would come in as a favor and do a guest lecture. And I remember, because we were freshmen at the time, he never spoke to the freshman class. It was always more like the upperclassmen. He would come in and talk and do almost like a little master class or something. And at the time, the character animation department was like one big room on the bottom floor, and then there was levels with no roof really, of where you could kind of hang out on top. And so we would when the juniors or seniors had Glen Keane speaking in the
there's
class,
like a walkway on the second layer above that, and that had a railing to it, and you could actually sit on that walkway up there and stick your feet through the railing and basically listen in.
Just look down. Yeah, look down into the class and watch Glenn draw or show some clips or his animation. And we were just in awe. I remember it was like you and me and Pete Docter and Donovan Cook and Mark Kennedy. Those are all guys that were in our freshman class. And we would just sit there in awe of Glen Keane and wish we were down there. We were so jealous of the upperclassmen, because they got, front row seats, and we were like way up in the balcony there.
Oh, and etiquette wise is like, you don't, as a freshman who's in the upper tier balcony, you don't ask a question, right? Like that's only for people.
You don't say anything.
Yeah. And I remember like Pete Docter, I think, asked a question at the end because people weren't asking questions and stuff, and so he was emboldened and did it. And we were like, what the? Oh my gosh.
Pete, you're going to get busted.
They're going to throw you out of CalArts now. But Glenn, of course, was super nice, and he answered it. Oh, yeah. Right? It was not a big deal.
He knew we were up there. He knew we were up in the cheap seats, and looking down. And Glenn was cool. He was cool like that. He was just real kind. Real kind.
Yeah. So he never spoke to our class, because just to back up one more time, we've said this before. We only went to CalArts for a year and a half. So halfway into our sophomore year or second year for those Canadians, we left CalArts and got into a Disney internship. So I'm going to put a little bit more spotlight on that moment, which was he would come and talk about whatever he was working on at the time, basically. So I remember one lecture, it was Radigan. And that was probably when we were freshmen, because he was halfway into that film. So he had a lot to show, showed a lot of clips because he'd done a lot of work already. And he was talking about animation performance and stuff like that. And it was amazing. And then I remember another lecture he did was about quadrupedal animation. And he gave us, and I say us because we went and got it from the juniors and seniors later and made copies. But he gave us the sort of like the workbooks or worksheets that he would make at Disney on here's how you can relate quadrupeds to humans and how they move and how their skeletal is similar and different. It was all those kind of model sheets, and they're out there on the internet nowadays. But he made them for Oliver and Company to kind of get some. He did research, and then he would do these model sheets to kind of explain all that to the other animators. And he was doing Georgette. So now moving into Oliver and Company, Tony. And so for probably I would imagine it was the first semester of our second year. He came again and talked that time about Oliver and Company, showed some Georgette scenes, which probably would have been a little early in the production, I would guess. No, it must have been. No, it was toward the end, actually, if you think of the timeline. So somehow, I think when we saw the Radigan one, it was kind of old news. The film had just come out or was about to come out. And then when we heard the Oliver and Company one, he'd probably been working on it at least a year, if not longer.
Yeah, because Great Mouse Detective came out before we got into CalArts.
Before we got to CalArts. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So he was the whole time we were at CalArts, he was probably working on Oliver and Company. So it was probably more like he was on it for a year and a half, 2 years. When that lecture. Yeah. So that's the timeline if anybody cares.
And
But
that was like his first lead supervised an animator kind of role, I think. He'd come up with we talked about Bernard on Oliver and Company, but he did random scenes on that. And then what we didn't mention was he did Fox and the Hound. And
talk
that was a
about
big
Fox and the Hound, because this was,
that
I
was a
think,
breakthrough.
everything we've always heard. This is where Disney gave him a chance because they'd seen that he was doing really good work. And I think we'll assume that Ollie Johnston kind of was like pushing him and going, hey, yeah, Glen's ready. Let's give him something meatier.
Right. Right.
And so he got the bear attack, and specifically the bear. And I have a story to tell about
Fox and the Hound.
the bear. So you and I saw the bear soon around the time we got introduced to Glen, because again, it was his recent work. We started digging a little deeper, went back a little bit, we'd already seen Fox and the Hound, but saw drawings from that he had done of the bear attack. And it was amazing. His drawings, if that was where he discovered his soft, thick lead pencil, was on that film.
That's where he really got loose.
Because if you see the drawings from what he did on the bear attack, you would kind of go, as a cleanup artist, which is our first job in animation at Disney, we were cleanup artists, and that's where you actually you're the assistant to the animator. You put down another piece of paper and you do a nice clean, like with a technical pencil, a mechanical pencil, a nice clean line around every single drawing. And that's basically what cleanup is. And what he did in that, no animator had worked that rough before and then just handed it over to a cleanup person. Because there was just lines all over the place, and
it had energy, but it was so hard to tie down.
This is the part that a lot of people you don't hear from, but we heard about it all the time, which was the cleanup department. They loved Glen Keane and hated Glen Keane at the same time.
Because they knew that he was doing bold and experimental and really pushing the limits of animation. His stuff was just had energy and it was bold, and yet their responsibility was to try and rein in that boldness into a crisp, clear one line. And there was not very many people that was good at it. Many people started to do it and were excited and then gave up. And it wasn't until Bill Berg, who was ultimately his full-time cleanup lead. Like, he went from movie to movie, particularly on Beauty and the Beast. I remember Bill was the main guy when it came to cleaning up Glen's stuff, but kind of worked with Glen until he retired, really.
Because here's the difference. Like, we're on a tangent, but hopefully it's educational. The difference there were a lot of different levels of cleanup artists, and the big distinction, I think, and you back me up if you think this too, is there was two different cleanup artists. Both of them would do a clean line and all that, and knew how to draw pretty competently. You had to still know how to draw quite a bit, right? Because you were doing a lot of drawing. I mean, adding to the drawing, not just tracing it. So tracing is not involved at all in this job as much as you would think, right? They were having to reinvent, add, and things like that. And so both groups did that. But then there was that second tier group, which is what Bill Berg was, that had a really good understanding of animation, where they could probably be an animator themselves, or at least
I think Bill was an animator, but just not as strong an animator, and so he took the position of cleanup because he could draw so well.
And so those people could take on people like Glen's kind of animation, because you do have to reinvent it to some degree. I was that way with Marken, actually. Marken was also known for being a very rough animator, and so when I was his original cleanup assistant back when we first started in Florida, I had to learn animation as much as I needed to learn cleanup, and just the other half of cleanup, which was just drawing. But I learned a lot being his assistant, because I had to learn how he does his charts and what this means, what this line means, and that goes along with getting to know an animator really well, like Bill Berg did with Glen.
So here's a fun story about since we're talking about Fox and the Hound, and that was, like I said, that's where Glen really started to loosen up and become kind of understand what kind of animator he was, and how deeply now he was getting into his characters and the scenes. there was this great interview, and you can find it out there. It's online, but we used to make fun of it all the time. I remember, because it's like, it's Glenn talking about his process. He's like, so when I started on,
wait,
like,
before you go
energetic.
into it, I just have to correct you. But then you can tell the story. This was not, I don't know if it's online, Tony. I don't think it is. I haven't seen it online. Where
It
you
was a
saw
behind the
this
scenes kind of thing. Yeah.
But Tony, you're forgetting where you saw this. This
Where?
video was in Disney MGM Studios, and we would
Oh,
see it all the time because if you
okay.
took the tour, there was a little waiting area before you went into the sort of the classic animated films. They'd done like a movie where it was all the best shots of animated films just to pump you up about animation. But in that little waiting room, they had monitors and artwork on the walls and pictures of the Nine Old Men. And in that, there was clips, and a lot of it was from Oliver and Company and before, because of when they were making that display. That was the newer movies that were coming out, because this was pre-Little Mermaid. So it was anything pre-Little Mermaid. And so Glenn is in there. And I don't know if you can find it any other place than in that video. So they were grabbing these behind the scenes from their archives.
So let me do it, Tom.
Go ahead.
Impersonate it, because this is what I remember. So you're right. That's where it came from. But I remember Glenn, and he's like, so then I was asked to work on the bear in Fox and the Hound. And there's this sequence where this big burly bear comes out, and there's a waterfall behind it, and they're walking across a log, and this bear's on one side, and I forget the name of the fox there, Skip or Kip or whatever, has to like get by him, and the bear attacks the.
Hold on. You got to throw this in there because you're gonna miss it. I remember that I saw this video way more than you. So I researched bear attacks, and I was getting there. Okay, go ahead. All right, I thought you would skip it.
So at first, I just thought of it. I would do my first drawings, and the bear was big on the page, and I started kind of big, and then it wasn't good enough. It wasn't strong enough, and I started doing research, and I thought I got to dig deep into what a bear is and how angry and vicious they are. So I started reading these events where bears attacked humans, and it was gory, and they have big paws, and they got these claws that would extend out, and they
rip
would
your face right up.
Yeah, he got like so into it, and he's like, so I went back to my board, and I started drawing the bear bigger and bigger, and I threw that page away, and then I made it bigger until he was taking up the whole page, and it was just
bear everywhere,
bear, and he's high in the frame, and it's just huge, and his claws are just massive. And that's how I got the power of the bear. It's like,
that's pretty accurate.
That's short of it. I mean, but it was just his. And
we would watch that video over and over again, because sometimes we would take a break and we would go up into the tour part, kind of walk around the curtains, you could say, and take a little walk along with everybody else and kind of like wave at people on the other side of the glass, our friends. But just talk around and just watch what they see and listen to people's questions about, dumb questions about animation and stuff like that, and just be a part of that side of it, the fan side.
Yeah.
And so then at the end, of course, we would always sit and watch that Glen Keane talking about the bear attack and how I had to draw it bigger. Pretty soon it's just lines all over the place. Yeah. Okay, so I'm glad you went there.
I just remember us making fun of each other too. Like I remember going by like Aaron Blaze's desk, and he's working on like a Roger Rabbit scene. I'm like, Aaron, you know what you need to do? Research circus animals or something, but you need to draw them bigger and bigger.
Yeah, bigger. Tell there's just lines all over the page. Yeah. And so they would show a part of that, Tony. They would show the rough animation. And it went along with his narration, because it was just lines all over the page and really rough and scribbly. And so here's where I want to land this. Another little anecdote. I think I've told this one other time on a podcast, but years later, I saw Glen Keane at San Diego Comic-Con. And tell me if you remember this story. You weren't there, but I've told you this story. I was at San Diego Comic-Con, and I was by myself. I don't know why. I can't remember who I'd gone with, probably you and our friend John Schaefer. But I
You
was
got
walking
lost from
around.
mom. Yeah.
Yeah, mom, I lost her hand and like, Mama.
Mama?
Anyway, I I was trying to get into the panel on, was it Tangled? Or it was before that.
Oh, it must have been.
Yeah, whatever Glen Keane, Treasure Planet, I'm gonna say. Let's
Okay.
just say it
Maybe
was
Treasure
Treasure
Planet.
Planet. Anyway, it was full. I didn't think ahead and talk to a friend at Disney and go save me a seat and all that. It was just everything went wrong. I didn't get in. And so I just sort of like was hanging around and I did something else and I ended up coming back. But at any rate, I saw Glenn after probably staying there for another half hour after the panel, signing autographs and things like that. I happened to see him walking by to go to wherever he was going to go to next. Like I think he was going to Stewart Ing Books, actually. He wanted, because so I see him and we'd already worked together on Pocahontas and stuff, so he knew who I was. I'm like, hey Glenn. He's like, oh hey Tom or Tony. What? We went through that. Oh, it's Tom.
Yeah.
I'm the one that worked with you. And yeah, okay. Anyway, and he's like, I'm like, where you headed? And he's like, oh, stewarding books. I got to try and find that on the floor because I told him I'd be there to sign something, but there's a book I want to get on French Impressionism. I don't know. And so I'm like, oh, well, I'll walk you there. I'm not doing anything. And let's go. I wanted to hang out. And
you're like, can I hold your hand? Can I hold your
yeah,
hand?
can we take a picture? What if can I get on your shoulders? Anyway,
Okay.
so we're walking along and we end up walking. So we go into the actual where all the booths are, huge San Diego Comic-Con. And we happen to walk by Howard Lowry Gallery. Howard Lowry Gallery was like a big cell collector gallery, but they always had a booth at San Diego full of just amazing cells and animation drawings. They would bring a ton of them. They were like the animation cell equivalent of Stewart Ing Books. And so they had that display up, and we happened to walk through the middle of it. Of course, they knew who he was, and so the gallery owners are like, "Oh, hey, Glenn!" And they're stopping him and trying to get him.
Got any drawings that you want to sell?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They're just smoozing him up, and he's good with it, and he knows I'm not in a rush. So we end up. He's like, "Oh," and I'm like, "No, hey," and so I end up like just looking around. While I'm there, I'm looking in the bin because he put a little time in to talking to this guy. And so while I'm there, I'm looking through the bin. They have stuff that's framed and all that, but the bin has just rough animation drawings.
Rough drawings,
all on like little celluloid things. And they're the cheaper ones too, by the way. So obviously I'm looking through there because I'm like, oh man, this was my first time to Howard Lowry on that trip anyway. And I was like, maybe I'll buy something. And because you could get rough drawings for like $100 or 500, somewhere in there. And I was like, okay, yeah, if I could find like a gem. Sure enough, I find a Glen Keane bear drawing from the Fox and the Hound, and I love it, and I take it out and I show it to him, and it's the worst one. This is not a good drawing at all. What it was literally was the bear was going off of the screen. He was like tumbling whatever and going off the screen. And this was literally the last drawing before it went blank, right? Where he's off. That was the drawing. It was like his hairy back or something like that. Like you wouldn't know it was the bear at all. It was like a piece of the bear as he went off screen. And so I show it to him as a joke. I'm like, look at this. And he's like, oh my gosh, that's so fun. Yep, that's my drawing. I could tell by the the thick lines. I went crazy on that film. And I know you had to draw it bigger.
You're like, that's how you drew it bigger, right? Bigger.
I couldn't wait to say it. And I do think I told that story of like how we watched that all the time. Anyway, and it was only like, we'll say $50, $75. Everybody, like, I don't even know if they could tell somebody that's a Glen Keane drawing, right? Because they couldn't probably prove it. It was so little information on the page. So but they knew it was Fox and the Hound and all that. And they could attribute it to Glenn, but they couldn't prove it. And so anyway, I put it back but the last thing he said to me was, you know, what's funny? I don't have any drawings from Fox and the Hound. I don't even have one because they just they kept them all or they threw them away really. And so I guess they all didn't get thrown away. This one still existed. But he's like, I don't have any from that. I know they're out there, but I don't have any and all that. And so I walk them. We're like, oh, wow, that's amazing. I walk them back to stewarding. I drop them off and we say goodbye and all that. Tony, I went back and I bought that drawing and I gave it to him. I sent it to him. I kept it for, I didn't see him again on that trip. He was leaving that.
I knew that.
No, I know. He was leaving that day.
This was after you worked with him on Pocahontas. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. He was leaving that day. I was working at abcmouse.com, I think, at the time, if I remember right. And so I was
making a lot of money.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe. But it was cheap. It was Tony, it was very cheap. But because he said, I don't have one and all that, and I knew this was not like, that is not something he would buy for himself.
Not the one he really wanted.
No, I mean, like, but as just sort of a funny, I bought it.
Yeah.
And I ended up, I think, mailing it to him when I was in California, or I don't think I actually gave it to him in person, but I think I mailed it to him. And I did remember hearing back that he was really touched because it was a good month or two later that I ended up giving it to him. Oh, you know what it was? I'm sorry. I'm going to double down. I thought about it. I didn't buy it then at Comic-Con. I thought about it for a while and I thought, you know what? I'm going to buy that. So I went online and found it on howardlowry.com and bought it. That's why it was a few months later. So anyway, that's my story.
Okay. That didn't really add anything to the story, but thanks for adding that detail.
It's a story, you know.
Yeah. Anyway, that's pretty cool. So we are definitely running out of time here, but in our Glen Appreciations episode,
2 more stories.
Okay, I'm going to skip to Beauty and the Beast. So by this point, at Beauty and the Beast, I'm an animator on Beauty and the Beast. I'm in California. Tom, you were working on the film from Florida, but I'm there in the studio with Glenn, and I'm in the studio with all the supervising animators, and I'm a junior trainee working with Will Finn, who is my mentor on Cogsworth the Clock. But Glenn was down the hallway, and we would get together on Fridays. And when I say we, not just me and him, but I was, you know, a little bit of afraid to go into Glenn's office, even though he was known to be a guy that you could knock on his door and he would pretty much stop and go, yeah, hey, what's going on? And talk to you. And
which is amazing because he was so busy.
He was so busy. I don't know how he did it because I did hear him on, I'm fast forwarding a little bit to Aladdin now, because I also worked with him on Aladdin, not with him, but you know, he was down the hall working on Aladdin while I was doing Iago. And there was many nights where we'd stay late and, you know, the studio would bring in catering so we can have dinner there and just keep working. And I remember having dinner with him a couple times and just talking about the stress that he was under on Aladdin, particularly, even more than Beauty and the Beast. But Aladdin was like they say that Aladdin was, out of all the Disney films, that the character Aladdin was in more scenes per that film than any other main character in any other Disney film.
Probably tell Milan.
He's just in like every scene. It has Aladdin in it, which is kind of rare. But he had like 13 animators with him working on Aladdin, and he had to go over all their work, and he would only have the evenings. Early in the morning or late at night is when he would actually shut his door and animate his own shots.
Otherwise, he was going over all the cleanup artist stuff, all the animator stuff.
All the animators. I mean, we're talking about like, probably 20 different people.
I'll add to that. On Pocahontas, he actually had a sign-up sheet on his door.
Yeah.
And he had, here's my office hours. Here's where I'm animating. Like he blocked out, okay, these hours I have to animate. Don't bother me. Here's my office hours. And it was a sign-up sheet. You could go in that 2 hours.
Yeah. It was like a professor would have with his students, right?
Yeah.
You know, you'd have office hours and that sort of thing. Yeah, he had to have that. And I remember that on Beauty and the Beast too. Mm-hmm. So going back to Beauty and the Beast, there was some crazy things. But one of the funniest stories I remember about Glenn is that, you know, by that point, he had a lot of power. The studio, he was already the rock star that he is and would become even further on Beauty and the Beast. He was doing the main character there, Beast, and kicking butt. And I remember we were working in these warehouses in Glendale. They were just like literally it was like a medical supply company or something before we moved into it and put animation desks in it and started working on Beauty and the Beast in it. So just like, cheap walls and things like that, air conditioning ducts, just, out in the open. But anyway, I remember when we finished Beauty and the Beast, they moved out. Or no. This is in the very beginning. This is when we moved into the building. And so they're starting to move. We had like a good week where there was like downtime where we're packing up our stuff from the old building and moving into this new building to make Beauty and the Beast. And it was completely open when we first walked in and got a tour of the building.
Every
And they're
other
like, "Oh,
studio would give you a day to do that, but at Disney you got a week, I bet.
yeah, at least 3 days or something." Well, and there was also like just so many desks and so much furniture. So the first thing they did was they put us in tours and small groups of animators, and they'd take us through. Okay, you're going to be in this office, and you're going to be in this, just to kind of get us excited and
I
whatever.
remember you telling me about that. I was in Florida, but I'd hear about that. I was so jealous.
But they were like, we're gonna totally redo these walls here. We're gonna repaint. They were telling us all the things they were gonna do. And so when the corporate people, the executives left, I remember one of the animators had like a big slingshot. It was one of those like multiple rubber bands connected to each other, and they made this like huge launching kind of thing.
The kind where you could kill someone. Yeah.
And we were taking turns having fun. It was like at the end of the day, and we were shooting up this wall with I forget what it was like. It was something that would just like explode into a burst of like paint. It was or something like that. Maybe it was tomatoes. We'll say tomatoes. We were shooting these like rocks and tomatoes into the walls and making these big holes and stuff and just going splat, because there was nothing in this building. It was a huge warehouse, and we're just firing it all the way.
This is the one you were leaving, not the one you were moving into. This is the one you were leaving.
I guess it was the one. I guess the one we were leaving, because they said, they're going to renovate the whole thing right after we left. And they had just taken all the desks out and everything. It was completely.
This is the Flower Street building where they made Little Mermaid.
It was probably that, or it was, or where we did Beauty and the Beast. I can't remember exactly. But I do remember Glenn was like front and center, and he was having it was like a big kid. He was just like, and then I did it bigger. No, he just
he grabbed a bigger tomato.
Let me show you how to do this. I can make it bigger. No, he would get behind the launcher, or he would be in the front of the launcher holding it and just giggling and laughing. And they're like, I can remember animators like, Glenn, see how far you can do it. Come on, Glenn, do it again. Do it again. And just like egging him on. And he was just having a ball and just thrashed these walls. And I was like, I can't believe I'm at Disney. This is awesome.
And you could do anything. You weren't going to get in trouble because Glenn was doing it too.
Yeah.
Right.
I remember somebody coming in like a security guard or something that, Disney security guard. We didn't know what was going on or who was who. And they're like, hey, you guys, what are you doing over there? Look what you're doing. Are you going to pay for these walls? And Glenn's just like, sorry. Okay, we'll stop. And then he would leave and they would just keep going. It was awesome.
Yeah, he was I remember that Glenn. So we were fortunate to see that side of Glenn because he was, let's be honest, a lot younger, but and had power. Definitely, he was already on the rise, even around Beauty and the Beast and stuff. But like, he still hadn't done. It was about Little Mermaid on. Honestly, the stuff that people really, really remember him for. But like, again, we're trying to talk about the rise of Glen Keane, where he and that's Rescuers. That's where he's just a beginning animator, just an animating assistant, and then of course into Great Mouse Detective and Mickey's Christmas Carol, Great Mouse Detective, and Oliver and Company. Those three, I think, were really where he was, getting to be the Glen Keane we would then later on get to know, the world would get to know as like leading the studio, honestly. Artistically.
Well, here's a good example. So Tom, this is Beauty and the Beast again. I got a great story here because I tell my students this story because I just think it's so inspiring. I used to always show Glen Keane's rough animation of the Beast transformation, at the end of the film when she says, I love you. And the last petal falls, and then all of a sudden this magic, comes around
Yeah, the
him and he rises
transformation.
up. Yeah, well, in the storyboards, and Glenn had done some of the storyboards, it was pretty rough and loose, and wasn't quite as powerful. And Glenn, um, it was actually, it was before Glenn got involved with it. It was pretty like banal. It was kind of boring, actually. And Glenn had saved, he did all this animation of that transformation at the end of the film. And as any animator
No,
knows, is
he
that
hadn't done it. He saved it for
he
last.
saved it. Yeah. But then we got really behind. This happens all the time. And production was coming down on Glenn and saying, we need all that transformation stuff, all these scenes. And it was like, I want to say like 15 scenes or something like that. We need done in a month or something like that. You got to crank this stuff out. And and this is Glenn's power, of course, at the time, was like, he said, no, I'm not gonna, I'll give up some of this other stuff that he had on his desk. He says, no, I need to spend time on this. And he went away and he re-storyboarded stuff. He
Well, and
suggested new.
we need to compliment Don Hahn, because there was part of that
Yeah.
story is even though Don was the producer and his job was to make sure Glenn got it done, he goes into Glenn's office and he says, Glenn, we have to have this. And he's like, and Glenn's stressed and all that. And he's like, I think it was Don's suggestion, but don't do it today. Take a break and just go think about it. And Glenn went, yep. And he went to the museum.
Yeah, I heard it was a couple days. I don't think it was just one, but he went to the museum and he studied, famous paintings and sculptures.
It's famously, I think it's a Rogan sculpture that is actually outside of the museum. And he said he saw that and he saw the power, that was within this sort of twisted, muscles of this character, and that inspired him.
Yeah, and so he went back and he reboarded some things, pushed it through by the directors. Said, oh, they loved it. It was much more powerful. He changed some things, and then he roughed out all of those scenes. But really taking he had to take a step back and go, what is this missing? It's missing some power. It's not just magic. He wanted it to feel like a true, like painful coming through a cocoon and coming out and bursting out into life.
That whole kind of thing with the effects, and he animated the rough effects of it, of the cape kind of as he turned, because I don't think the turn, he really wanted, because he was walking around that Rogan sculpture and he was like, that's what I'm missing, is that dimensionality and the power that you could see. And so he turned beast. That wasn't originally part of it, and had him kind of get wrapped up in his cape like a cocoon. All that was what got added.
Then that transformation, the human character bursts out by thrusting his hand out first, and then there's light that comes through his hand. And I mean, you've seen it, but if you've only seen the movie, you got to go online to YouTube and see the rough animation for that sequence, because Glenn was shading all those drawings, doing light and shadow on it. That was like, this was fine art. This was like pieces of fine art that he created out of that animation. It never looked as good as his rough drawings that he did. And then poor Bill Berg and his cleanup team had to like take these beautiful, like, pastel-y kind of drawings and graphite drawings, and reduce it down to lines that were going to be colored in with flat color. And it never had the life and energy of his roughs, but it's still powerful, still really powerful because of what he did.
And that's kind of a summary of Glenn, is like, I feel like he's always in pursuit of trying to get his rough drawings on the screen. And we know this because Milt Kahl had the same problem. Milt was a master draftsman, and he always wanted his drawings on there. He felt like cleanup was ruining his work and blah, blah, blah. And he wanted his drawings on the screen. And he ended up getting it a little bit because of Xeroxification, whatever you want to call it, the Xerox process that they brought in, where in the 60s, and that really was because of Milt Kahl. He was the one pushing. He's like, I want to see the roughness of the drawing and I want that on the screen. I don't want these. He felt like the cleanup process killed it. It was dead. It was a stiff line. It was he wanted that line boil and all that. And so for 101 Dalmatians and Jungle Book and Fox and the, not Fox and the Hound, but Robin Hood, that kind of generation in the 60s, those films, he got what he wanted. And they did keep the line rough, and you could see a lot of construction lines. Glen was on similar but different in that he wanted to have that thick line, that meaty line, and his roughs and the life that we're in that. So same idea, and even the shading. And he got a little bit of that on Pocahontas, but you see that pursuit throughout his career, like, because we didn't talk about it, but no fault to the cleanup department, but on that bear sequence, he doesn't talk about it a lot, but he was bitterly disappointed in the cleanup of his bear animation because the drawings were so alive and so like fine art. They were like Michelangelo scribbly drawings and so dimensional, and then that it got cleaned up, and it really, if you look at the film, it's not super standout, but if you see the rough animation of it, it was like nothing you'd ever seen before, and so powerful and raw. But they lost all that in the cleanup, and they did their best. It would be a nightmare to figure that out. But he got it more in Pocahontas. Like, he finally got them to say, at least for like Colors of the Wind, there's those sequences, those couple scenes where he actually
graphite hair and stuff,
graphite,
charcoal.
And then you see him bring it back too. There's some sequences in this is much later, where it's 2D drawings of what's the one he did at Netflix that he directed?
Over the Moon.
Over the Moon. There's a couple sequences there where he kind of just did almost like Pocahontas, like rough, supposed to look kind of like pastels, animated.
Yeah. And by that time he had done like the Google Spotlight too, that short that he did.
And he did that one rough, but then go to the next level, Deer Basketball. That was like his crowning achievement of the Google and the Deer Basketball. That's him doing, I'm just going to I want to be a fine artist animator. I want to get these pencil drawings on there with shading and all that. And he just went to town. And I think that's the Glen that we're going to see for the rest of his life, honestly. I know he's working on something now. Let's land this plane. I'm going to say this. For the film that we're working on right now, Tony, The Light of the World, we tried to get Glen Keane to work on it. And
I know.
I had a meeting. You came in on it too. Me and John Schaefer, the director, and we met with Glen. And there was a certain sequence that we were going to let him I knew what he wanted. He wants to do pencil animation and not have it cleaned up. We were just going to do that. Just like do this one sort of, it's not a dream sequence, but it was that sort of an idea where it was a flashback. Do it all in your way. And he's a believer, so we knew that he would be interested in this story of Jesus, the subject matter. And he wanted to. He was interested, you could tell, and he just couldn't make it work. He was like, I have this other thing in France, and if it comes through, it's sort of my dream project, and I have to do it. And unfortunately, it came through. And so he picked that. Unfortunately for us, but not for him. So he is working on something. I know at least what it's for, and it's a big kind of event thing. But I don't know all about it. But he's doing it in France, and it's going to be amazing. And I have a feeling it's going to be pencil drawings all over the place.
Yeah, it's going to be his style. That's definitely become his trademark now, is the rough drawings. And he does it like nobody else, So,
yeah. Well,
Glen Keane. Yeah.
Glen Keane, everybody. Glen, if you're listening to this, I hope we didn't mess it up too much and that we got some of the facts right. I think the heart.
And you could come on the podcast again, Glen, and you could correct us and go through all these and tell your own stories, your own version, your own side of it. These were our side. This is our weak memories, trying to remember a lot of these great stories about Glen.
Yeah.
And there's so many more that we didn't get to, but this was fun. It was fun to go down reminiscing about a guy that really means a lot to us personally, you and I, Tom, but also to the industry. Huge impact to the industry.
Huge. And you can't say enough. I mean, just like you hear about Miyazaki and how he affected, but I don't think he affected people. I'm going to be bold and say, I don't think Miyazaki has a reputation where he affected people personally.
Yeah.
Like help their lives and things like that. Like you hear actually the opposite, unfortunately, that he was hard to work with. He would be hard on people. He was kind of cold, or,
And then take credit mostly. I mean, let's face it, you go
yeah,
see a Miyazaki film because it's Miyazaki, but Glenn was he just led the animators at Disney and to make great Disney animation.
more than
He
that,
was,
he inspired them. We all wanted to do better because of Glenn. And thank you,
yeah,
Glen Keane, for that.
absolutely.
All
And
right,
so,
buddy.
good talking.
And our sign off, Tony, is from Glen Keane. I've told this story many
Inspired
times.
by,
I have a
yes,
drawing hanging up over there that he gave me on the Little Mermaid. It was a throwaway drawing that I stole off his desk, just like Mark did. And he signed it to me, and he said on it, "Animate
from
from
the
the
heart.
heart."
Be sure to subscribe to the Pencilish Studios YouTube channel.